Well, today the topic that we have selected is to discuss work breakdown structure and scope baseline. This falls under the scope management knowledge area and mostly from the planning process group of project management. It's a bit difficult to pick up a topic from anywhere from the PMBOK and start talking about it. So I would rather take 5 minutes to discuss the background, discuss the relationship of other processes with this particular process, and then we would talk about the scope baseline and work breakdown structure. Well, what you see on your screen right now is a list of all project management processes as described in PMBOK 5.0. Hope you are aware that since 31st of July 2013, PMBOK has upgraded their version to 5th version. So as per version 5, we have total 10 knowledge areas instead of 9 knowledge areas that we had in version 4. And we continue with those 5 process groups that we have. Has anybody any idea about what's a project management process? It's not necessary that I have to do the talking all the time. You can also contribute. We can make it a knowledge sharing session rather. So any idea what do I mean by a project management process? No? Okay. Well, if I use simple terms, we can consider that a project management process is nothing but a project management task or a project management activity that a project management team or any other key stakeholder needs to perform in order to complete the project end to end. So what you see on your screen right now, start in the the lighter part of this table, starting from here, 4.1 till the end, that's 13.4. All these are project management tasks or activities. It's just that PMI does not use the term task or activity for project management related work, so they rather use the term process. So when I say process, I'm actually talking about a project management task or activities. Now, in order to explain these project management processes in a better way, they are distributed, first of all, into 5 process groups. The first row that you see here, these are 5 project management process groups, which are initiating process group, planning process group, executing process group, monitoring and controlling process group, and closing process group. Depending on what stage of project management life cycle do we do these processes, these are broken into these 5 process groups. Pretty simple. If we say that during the planning stage of the project, these are all the activities that we do, then all these activities are part of the planning process group. Makes sense? Similarly, there are 2 activities that we need to perform even before we enter into the planning phase of the project. That's we create a project charter and we identify all the stakeholders related to the project. So these 2 processes are part of initiating process group. Is it clear, guys? So depending on what stage of project management life cycle do we do these activities or do we do these perform these project management processes, we have broken them down into 5 process groups. At the same time, depending on the area of application or depending on the focus area of the project management team, we have total 10 knowledge areas. For example, what all do we need to do in order to manage scope within the project? It would be part of the scope management knowledge area. What all do we need to do in order to manage the project schedule? Would be part of time management knowledge area. So we can say any process, any project management process is part of a particular knowledge group depending on the area of application or the focus area of the project management team, and also part of a particular process group depending on what stage of project management life cycle do we perform these processes. Now, if we concentrate on today's topic, that's Create WBS is the process which gives you the output work breakdown structure. Okay, that is a process part of scope management knowledge area. At the same time, it's also part of the planning process group. Any doubt, guys? Any question, any concern, any query whatsoever at this point of time? No? Are we all clear? Okay. Now, let's understand how exactly do we enter into this particular process. We say that we start a project with a project charter. That's a very initial document that we do, that we create as part of the project management life cycle. And the project charter formally recognizes the existence of the project, and hence it gives the project manager the authority to spend organizational resources on the project. Once the project charter is created, you can say the project has been initiated. After that, the second process that we do after the charter is created is identify stakeholders. We come up with a stakeholder register that has a documentation of all the stakeholders who are associated with the project, positive and has a positive or negative impact on the project, or influences the outcome of the project in some other way. Okay, that's the main objective of identify stakeholder process. We come up with a list of all the stakeholders called stakeholder register. Once your stakeholder register has been created, we concentrate on creation of the project management plan. That's a very early stage of the planning, wherein we do planning for the planning stuff. Okay, and then as part of the actual planning, the very first thing that we do is we collect requirements from the stakeholders. Simple logic, guys. We have identified all the stakeholders who are directly or indirectly, positively or negatively associated with the project. Now we would use all the information gathering techniques to collect the requirements from all the stakeholders, and we would come up with a requirement documentation. That's the objective of the process 5.2, collect requirements. Have a question in the question panel. Can we have a copy of the slide decks? Yes, we would provide you the copy, the soft copy of this slide deck. We'll also provide you the recording of this session. No worries. Okay, so the primary output of this process, collect requirements, is a requirement documentation. This requirement documentation is now validated against the project charter, and with the help of project charter, requirement documentation, and the statement of work that was applied by the customer, we define the scope and we come up with a detailed project scope statement. A detailed project scope statement is the primary output of defined scope process. Then, if I ask you a question, can I simply hand over a subjective document to my team members and expect the team members to go through the entire document to understand the scope? Can I do the estimation, monitoring and controlling, managing the scope, etc., everything on a subjective document like this project scope statement? What do you think? Is it possible? My question is, we said that we create a detailed project scope statement out of the process 5.3, define scope. Can we actually do all the budgeting, estimation, planning, scheduling, monitoring and controlling, and also understanding the scope based on such a huge subjective document? No is the answer. We cannot do that. Why? Because if we look at let's say my project is about constructing a 5-story building. That building will take approximately 6 to 8 months to construct, and my project's duration is that long, and it's a complex project. It's really not possible for me to look into the project as a whole and do the costing, budgeting, estimation, monitoring, controlling, etc., etc. on a subjective document. It's always a better idea to break down the project scope into small work packages. Or we can say that break down the entire project scope into smaller and more manageable pieces. Okay? That's called the work. Those are called the work packages, and the diagram we get is called work breakdown structure. Work breakdown structure is the primary output from this Create WBS process. Along with the work breakdown structure, we also create a WBS dictionary, a work breakdown structure dictionary, which rather documents the details of all the work packages inside one document. Okay? So this completes the planning part of project scope. Now, we can say the scope statement, the WBS dictionary, and the WBS. 3 separate documents, guys. The scope statement, that's an output of defined scope process. The work breakdown structure, that's an output of Create WBS process. And the WBS dictionary, which is a secondary output of the Create WBS process. These 3 documents together constitute the scope baseline. And this completes the planning part of scope management knowledge area. Now, one obvious question that arises here is, what is the meaning of the word baseline? Can I have a volunteer who can explain what is the meaning of the word baseline? Yeah, I would elaborate on the WBS dictionary. I have a separate slide for that. Don't worry. I'm just giving you an initial idea to show the relationship between the processes. We would discuss the work breakdown structure and the work breakdown structure dictionary in a detailed way. Don't worry. Okay, somebody says it's approved changes for a project. Approved, that's not a very correct statement, rather, not approved changes. Approved work for the project, which includes approved changes, very close to correct. It's the first pass to any requirement, initial starting point of to fulfill the requirements for the project. The answer from Janet is more close to the correct answer. See, I'm just talking about the word baseline. I have never mentioned that a scope baseline or cost baseline, whatever. Baseline is an initial standard or a measurement that we set aside for future comparison point of view. For example, if we set aside a scope baseline, I can use that scope baseline during the monitoring and controlling process group to compare the actual performance of the project. I'll give you a very simple example to make it absolutely clear in your mind. You might have seen that railway schedule, the railway timetable, the schedule of the trains that's published by the railway department. Okay? The schedule of the trains or the railway timetable that we consider, what the timetable basically gives you. It gives you the time at which a particular train is supposed to arrive at the platform, the time at which a particular train is supposed to depart and reach the next station. So basically it gives you the schedule or the time of the trains which are running on that particular track. We can consider this as a baseline. Why? Later on, let's say if I want to measure the performance of a particular train, we can simply compare the performance of the train against the schedule to find out if the train is running late or is it running on time. So the railway timetable can be considered as the baseline, a performance baseline for the trains which are running on that particular track. Similarly, now coming back to our example here, the work breakdown structure, the scope statement, and the work breakdown structure dictionary, these three documents together sets the initial measurement point or initial standard for the project from the scope point of view. Later on, during the monitoring and controlling process group, we can measure the actual performance of the project, compare it against these baselines, and find out if the project is running as per the target, as per the plan, or if there is a deviation. Is it clear, guys? So quickly, just to recap in a nutshell, when we start a project, we create a project charter, then we identify all the stakeholders. We use the information gathering techniques to collect the requirements from the stakeholders. With the help of those requirements, we come up with a detailed project scope statement, the statement of work that was supplied under the contract, and the project charter, which has already been created, are also major inputs to this process. And we come up with a detailed project scope statement as an output of 5.3. Now, my next step is to break down the project scope into small work packages so that I can monitor and control the project scope in a better way. That is called the work breakdown structure. Hope this gives you some idea about how this particular process is initiated and what's the relationship of this process with other processes in the other knowledge areas. Please keep this in mind. This WBS that we created is used as an input for defining scope, sequencing, estimation from resource and duration point of view, also for cost estimation, and also for various other planning activities like planning quality parameters, planning the human resources, planning, identifying the risk factors, and taking the procurement decisions, etc., etc. So it's a very useful planning tool, okay? And that's why we consider it as mandatory work or mandatory deliverable for any project, may it be a small project or a large project, complex or simple. Okay, Alan has a question. What if you fail to identify all the stakeholders at the onset of the project, thus opening us up to scope creep during the project, or worse, have the project failure due to missing requirements? That's the reason we have collect requirement process in the beginning of the planning stage. Guys, let me ask you this. Forget the scope creep or missing requirements. Simply consider this, that you did not collect the requirement from one of your key stakeholders, and later on, when your project is halfway through the production, halfway through the execution phase, that same stakeholder comes back to you and says, well, you never asked me what my expectation is from this project, so I want this deliverable to be created out of this project. It will always trigger a change request, and the cost of changes are always higher if they are initiated at a later stage of the project. In order to ensure that we do not have unnecessary change requests going forward in the project execution phase, it's always a better idea to collect all the requirements from all the stakeholders. In order to do that, you have to identify all the stakeholders at the first place, and then use all the information gathering techniques, document their requirements, also validate those requirements against the charter, and include the validated requirements within your project scope. So that way you also set the expectations of your stakeholders that what can be made part of the project and what cannot be made part of the project. Okay, Alan, hope that answers your question. So that's the logic behind having collect requirements process in the initial stage of the project planning. Moving ahead, the PMI explains all the processes with the help of inputs, outputs, and tools and techniques. What is an input, or what are the inputs for a particular process? Inputs are those that you need in order to do a particular process or do a particular project management activity. For example, in order to break down the project scope into small work packages, we need to have the understanding of the project scope, which we would get from the scope management plan and the SOW, the scope statement, that not the SOW, rather the scope statement that was created in the previous process. So the scope statement and the scope management plan are the primary inputs to this process. Along with that, the requirement documentation, which is an output of the collect requirement process, is another output to this process. We would need the standard templates, guidelines. We would also need to know the environment of the project, the constraints, etc., etc. So organizational process assets and enterprise environmental factors are the common inputs to most of the planning processes. The process of breaking down the project scope is called decomposition. Okay, we'll explain this decomposition process in details, don't worry. And along with that, we also need expert judgment in order to break down the project scope into small work packages. We come up with a scope baseline, which is a combination of WBS dictionary and the scope statement. And accordingly, based on our understanding of the scope, we update other project-related documents, such as we would need to make some amendments in the project management plan or the scope management plan, or come up with some guidelines for managing changes, etc., etc. Now, guys, keep this in mind from exam point of view. Please do not attempt to memorize the inputs, outputs, and tools and techniques. You saw in the previous slide that we have a lot of processes involved in end-to-end project management. It's really next to impossible to memorize all these inputs, outputs, and tools and techniques for all the processes. It's rather a good idea to remember the basic concept or the objective behind each and every project management process and the primary output of it. If you remember the objective and the primary output of every process, it's not difficult to understand the inputs, outputs, and tools and techniques from the exam point of view. The exam is not going to ask you to list down all the inputs, outputs, or tools and techniques for a particular process. It might have a question that out of the following options, which is not an input to this process, or which is an input to this process, or which is not the tools and techniques for this process, or which is not an output for this process. So in order to answer those questions, you do not really need to memorize this slide. Simply ask yourself, you are here in this process to break down the project scope. So what do you need? Of course, you need the scope statement. Of course, you need the scope management plan. All the scope-related documents are required. And it's a planning process, so we would need the two common inputs, organizational process assets and enterprise environmental factors. Any questions, guys, at this point of time? Now let's understand what is WBS all about. WBS is a deliverable-oriented grouping of project elements. It organizes and defines the total scope of the project, breaks the project into smaller and more manageable pieces. WBS is developed by identifying the project deliverable and then successively subdividing those deliverables into increasingly detailed and manageable subsidiary deliverables or components. If I take up a very simple example, let's say we were talking about a 5-story building construction project. All we will have to do is, let's say initially, the major deliverables that we would have are the design of the building. Then in the construction phase, we would have the construction of the building. Then we would have the electrical and plumbing work for the building, right? So these are the major deliverables for your for the project. Now, the construction work can be further broken into, let's say, construction of the ground floor, construction of the first floor, construction of the third floor, and so on. The decoration work can be broken down into interior decoration, exterior decoration, right? Then the construction of the first floor can be further broken into construction of the pillars, construction of the walls, construction of the floor, fitting the windows and the doors, etc., etc. So that way you would keep breaking down the deliverables till the time you cannot logically subdivide them further. That's the way you can create a WBS. We'll take up an example, don't worry. The WBS can be an outline, org chart, a fishbone, or any other form, but it has to be a decomposition. Sometimes you may have to wait until the deliverables of the sub-project are clarified in order to complete the WBS. That's called the rolling wave planning. It's very important from exam point of view. It normally gives you questions from these side topics which you tend to ignore. Okay, so keep this in mind. It might not be possible for you to create a WBS at a single go. Sometimes you create a WBS only till halfway through the project, and once the deliverables have been identified or clarified properly, then you start breaking down the project further. So that's an example of rolling wave planning. In simple words, we can say the rolling wave planning is just about doing the planning in stages. What's the key difference between entering an item in WBS versus it being an activity? See, look at it this way. We do not simply identify the activities related to the project. No. As we said, if you look into this statement here, we rather identify the top elements of the project. Let's say this is the project title. We would find out what are the key deliverables in the project. For example, if it's a software development project, mainly the software lifecycle would be the first layer of the WBS, like design, the planning, then coding, and then testing, etc. So that would be the first layer of the WBS. Then you keep breaking down each element, okay, further. So there is not much difference when you look at the end result, but the way you create the WBS is different. You take a top-down approach. That is, you keep breaking down the project scope till the time you cannot logically subdivide further. Tina has a question. How can you wait to complete the WBS till half of the project estimation, and many things are dependent on the WBS for the scope? Tina, there are a lot of things involved here. Let's say when you start a project, let's say if you are working on a large project, you do not do a cost estimation up to the minute level. You rather go for a ballpark estimation. Maybe you can use an analogous estimation technique to look into the historical data or previously undertaken similar projects to do the estimation as a whole and create the WBS only for half of the project. For example, let's say my project is about upgrading 500 desktop computers from Windows XP to Windows 7, and then we would also need to release the patches for the applications that we would install on Windows 7. Now, before we actually create a test environment with Windows 7, we cannot identify what all activities are involved for the application patching. Right? So we would create a WBS only up to the Windows 7 installation part, and then once we have created a test environment, once we have more deliverables or the scope is clear up to that point, then we would come up with the remaining part of the WBS. We are not saying that you will do a halfway planning and start the work. We are saying that you would do the planning in stages. Makes sense? Let's say you cannot complete the interior and exterior decoration work package till the time you have not come up with a design of the building. Before the design is created, it's very difficult for you to actually plan what all is required for the decoration work, right? So you define the WBS only up to the design phase, and then once that design document is ready, based on that, you come up with the rest of the WBS, that is the decoration work or the electrical work, plumbing work, etc., etc. Have somebody raised his hand, it seems. Who is it? Yes, I think there is a question from Olaiwala. If I pronounced your name correctly, I'm sorry. I just unmuted you. You can speak up, please.
Yeah, you're right. My name is Olayiwola. I just want to have clarification between the rolling wave planning and progressive elaboration. I just want to know if they are the same thing.
It's a very good question, rather. Progressive elaboration and rolling wave planning have a very thin line between themselves, Olaiwala. It goes this way, or rather if you consult PMBOK 5.0, it says that rolling wave planning is a type of progressive elaboration. See, progressive elaboration is also the concept wherein you do the planning in stages. But progressive elaboration doesn't really say that you would not have the deliverables ready. It's always a possibility that you do the complete planning, and once your plan is ready and you are entering into the execution phase, then you decide how you would execute it. For example, let's say your project is about connecting two buildings, okay? Let's say through the networking process. Now, you create the entire plan for this connection purpose, and once your plan is ready and you're entering into the execution phase, then you take up a decision whether to go for a wired solution or a wireless solution. That's an example of progressive elaboration. And rolling wave planning is a type of progressive elaboration which is mainly applicable for creation of WBS, wherein you do not define the entire WBS at a single go. You rather do the planning in stages. Make sense? So keeping it short and simple, Olaiwola, we can say it this way: rolling wave planning is an example of progressive elaboration. Okay, there is a 100% rule associated here. The total of work at lower levels must roll up to the higher levels with nothing left out. Means you should identify all work to be done as part of the WBS. For example, we said it's a deliverable-oriented grouping of all the work elements. So if my project involves communication, if my project involves reporting, presentations, meetings, etc., etc., we should have those included in the WBS as well. If it is not part of the WBS, it's not part of the project. So this is roughly all about WBS. Now let's take a look at how this WBS helps us and what are the main points we need to keep this in mind from exam point of view. As I said earlier, the first level of the WBS is most commonly same as the project life cycle in software projects. Okay, like the design, the planning, the development, implementation, and testing. It's created with the help of the team members. It's very important that you keep this in mind. Coming back to the topic, guys, we are saying the WBS is created with the help of the team members. Okay, and to be more precise, we can say it this way, that it's not the primary job of just the project manager or the project management team to create the WBS. The key team members, the project team members, are involved in the creation of WBS. Why so? What's the benefit we get out of that? By involving the key team members, we ensure that we get a team's buy-in on the project scope. So if we are creating the WBS while involving the project team, it helps us gain the team's buy-in automatically for the project scope. We do not have to go back to the project team members telling them that this is the work you got to do. More importantly, it works as a very good team building tool, as it happens during the very initial stage of the planning process group. The team members would start talking to each other, and they would start working as a team. It includes only the work to clear the deliverables. Work not part of WBS is not part of the project. Each level of WBS is a smaller segment of the level above. WBS breaks down the project into tasks or work packages or activities that cannot be logically subdivided further, are realistically estimable, can be completed quickly within 80 hours as a rule of thumb. It's also considered as a heuristics. It's another fancy name for the word rule of thumb. Have a meaningful conclusion and deliverable, can be completed without interruption, and can be outsourced or contracted out. Also keep this in mind that the last layer of the WBS is called the work package or work packages that you would see at the last layer of the WBS. The second last layer of the WBS, or maybe even a layer higher, which is used for controlling the project, is called control account. See, we said that you do the planning, estimation, monitoring, controlling, etc. based on the WBS. But if it's a large project, it might not be feasible all the time to do the planning, estimation, monitoring, controlling, etc. at such a lower level of the WBS. You might like to do the costing, budgeting, planning, estimation, etc. at a little bit higher level than the work packages. That layer, maybe the second last layer of the WBS, or maybe a couple of layers higher than the work packages, is considered the control account. And we use a numbering system in the WBS that's called code of accounts. The numbering system in the WBS helps you identify the elements of the work package. We'll show you with a diagram actually. That's called control account. Let's take up an example to understand this in a better way. What you see on your screen is a typical example of a WBS. Do not consider it as a real example. Rather, look at it as an illustration just from the example point of view. Here, we have first broken down the project into one layer, and then we have broken it down up to several layers till the time we cannot further break it down. So the last layer, this one, is considered as the work packages. Okay, these are the work components which can be completed within 8 to 80 hours, and they are called the work packages. Now let's say we have hundreds or thousands of work packages in this WBS, and we cannot really go up to the granular level in order to control scope or do the estimation, etc. So we rather do the monitoring, controlling, estimation, etc. at this layer of the work packages of the WBS. This would be called control account. Make sense, guys? And you see that we are using a particular numbering system. Let's say this is 1.1. This tells me that I would get this particular work package or work component in the second layer of the WBS. Then 1.1 is broken down into 1.1.1, 1.1.2, 1.1.3, and so on. So as I have three components here in this particular number, it tells me I would get this work component at the third layer of the work package. So this kind of a numbering system is called code of accounts. Any question, guys? Had a question actually from Sivan that RACI comes with WBS or a later stage. See, RACI matrix is a responsibility assignment matrix that you can that would rather come at a later stage, Sivan. Why? Because we first have to define the work packages, then we have to define who is responsible for which work package. So that's a second step after the WBS has been defined. Now, as I said, you can use the WBS for from estimation point of view. We can use a bottom-up estimation technique to do the estimation at a lower level, take an aggregation or summation to come up at an estimation for the project level. We can do the budgeting, scheduling, risk identification, staffing estimation, listing down the activities, controlling the project, scheduling the project, everything based on the WBS. Yes, there is a huge difference between code of accounts and control accounts. I'll take you back actually. Look into the bottom of the slide. Code of account is nothing but the numbering system of the WBS. Okay? The unique identifier for the each work package elements or work components in the WBS, that's called code of accounts. And control account is mainly the second last layer of the WBS, one or two layer higher than the work packages, wherein we do the monitoring and controlling of the project. For example, let's say I just told you that if you found that there are too many work packages in the WBS and we cannot really do the estimation and controlling based on the work packages, we rather want to do it at a higher level, okay, so that it's less time consuming. We would do the costing estimation, etc., at a second last layer of the WBS. That is considered as the control account. Is it clear? Okay. Now, having said all these things, if I ask you, what's the advantage of using WBS? I think after all this discussion, you should be able to, you should be able to say that on your own. Okay, there was another question. Can we say 1.1 is a control accounts? It depends. Let's say your project is being monitored and controlled only at the second layer of the WBS. So that is your control account. If you, what do I mean by monitored and controlled? Let's say you are tracking the activities which are at the third layer of the WBS in order to find out which activities or, if the activities are completed properly or not. So that becomes your control account. Okay. Now, having said this, if I ask you to list down the advantages and disadvantages, not disadvantages, rather all the advantages of WBS, hope you can do that on your own. The primary advantage, as listed in PMBOK, it helps prevent the work slipping through the cracks. So when you have a WBS and you have broken down the work into small work components, there is a very less possibility that you would miss on some deliverables. Otherwise, if you were controlling the project based on a subjective document, there is always a chance that you might miss on some deliverables. Right. So WBS helps prevent work slipping through the cracks. As per PMBOK 5.0, this is the biggest advantage of using WBS. Okay. Then it facilitates in communication between the project team and the stakeholders. How? Let's say if your senior management asks you, how much work have we completed? Instead of giving a generic answer that we have completed 10% of the work or 20% of the work, we can simply say that these are the work packages which are complete, these are the work packages which are pending. So WBS can work as a communication tool. It helps prevent the changes, and it gets teams buy-in. It's created by the team members. All the requirements are already taken into consideration, so it helps get teams buy in, and it also helps prevent the changes. Allows easier management of each component, allows accurate estimation of cost, time, and resource requirement, sets a baseline for performance measurement, easier assignment of resources and responsibilities, allows easier assignment of responsibility of the work. Tell me if you have any doubt, any question related to any of the topics or any of the points that you see in front of your screen. Have a question from Samir, it seems. Yeah, Samir, go ahead. I just unmuted you.
Yeah. Yes, yes. If the project, 1 minute.
Yeah, Samir,
Yes.
sorry, what's your
If
question?
the project scope, if the project scope is changing very frequently, then how we baseline the WBS?
See, two things here. There are various reasons for a scope change, Samir. Number one,
Okay.
a scope changes can be triggered due to missed requirements. So that is something that we have taken care of with the help of a requirement documentation. And let's say the scope is changing frequently because of customer requests or technological advancement, or maybe the volatility of the environment in which we are doing the work. So once the WBS is created, you take a sign off from all the key stakeholders and you freeze the WBS. Any change that is later required in the project scope, every change has to be amended within the WBS, and the WBS has to be once again baselined. I told you that WBS is part of the scope baseline. So every time there is a change in project scope, you have to adjust the baseline, right? So that adjustment has to happen in the WBS as per the theoretical concept. Every time there is a scope change, you have to update the WBS and also the project scope statement. Okay?
Yeah. Thanks.
Any other question from anybody else, guys? Moving ahead, talking about the technique that we use here, decomposition. It's the method using which we actually create the WBS. Never confuse from the exam point of view. WBS is the output that you get out of this process, and decomposition is the method of creating WBS. How we do this? Always define the major elements according to how the project is managed. Decide if adequate cost and duration can be estimated at this level. Identify constituent elements of deliverable in terms of tangible deliverable results, etc. And keep breaking it down till the time you cannot logically break it further. Keep verifying the correctness of the decomposition. Keep checking that is this much breakdown sufficient, or do we need to break down further? One more thing I must tell you from the previous slide, guys. Let's say the difficult part with PMP certification is that sometimes a PMP question would be in such a way that you would have multiple correct answers. Okay? But you would have to select only one option, which is the best of the lot. Okay? There cannot be double answers or triple answers selected in the exam. You'll always have to select only one answer. So that has to be the best of all the options given in your question. For example, if one of your exam questions says that which is the primary advantage of using WBS, and you have any four of all these listed points as your options. Keep this in mind that the biggest advantage of using WBS from exam point of view is it helps prevent the work slipping through the cracks. That's the biggest advantage as per PMBOK of using WBS. Needless to say, otherwise if the WBS is not in place, you would lose on a lot of things, but the main difficulty would be that if you monitor and control the project looking at a subjective document, there are always chances that you would miss on some deliverables and the work would be left out. Okay. So output of the Create WBS process are mainly two, WBS and WBS dictionary. Guys, hope you understand by now that WBS is a pictorial diagram. It mainly looks like a fishbone diagram or an org chart, right? So if I have to document a lot of things within the WBS, for example, I want to document who is responsible for what activity, who is the secondary responsible person, what all tools or techniques are involved with those work packages, what are the constraints or assumptions involved with the work packages. I do not really have the option to document all those stuff within the WBS diagram. So I would come up with a second or a secondary diagram document called the WBS dictionary. It mainly looks like an index, which uses the same numbering system that we used in the WBS, and it explains all the work packages in details. This is called the WBS dictionary. Okay. For example, you saw the work breakdown structure, which has the numbering system 1.1, 1.1.1, 1.1.2, etc. So you'll have a separate document called WBS dictionary, which would elaborate on every work component with the help of the same numbering system. Just like we have the glossary of a book or the index or the table of content of a book. As I said earlier, the scope baseline is the combination of three documents: the approved project scope statement that was the output of the previous process, along with the WBS and the WBS dictionary, and we also update the other project related documents as a secondary output of this process. Tell me, any question, guys? Are we absolutely clear on this topic? It's also important that you keep this in mind that the word breakdown structure is used in different ways. For example, we have terms like contractual WBS, organizational breakdown structure, resource breakdown structure, project breakdown structure, bill of material. These are examples of different breakdown structures. But please remember, only the project breakdown structure is an example of WBS. Rest are examples of breakdown structure, but not work breakdown structure. I repeat, out of all the examples given here, only the PBS, project breakdown structure, is another name for work breakdown structure, but other examples or other breakdown structures are not WBS. If you don't have any further questions for me, this is the end of the topic. Are we absolutely clear on this topic? Any question? I see somebody has raised his hand. Who is it? Sorry, I don't find that person. Probably he or she just took it away. Ola? Yeah? I just unmuted you.
Oh, okay, yeah. My question is this. At the level of the WBS dictionary, do we have information relating to the resources there? Does it capture information about the resource that is going to do the task? Is it there?
See, I would put it this way, Ulawala. I also have a very similar question from Janet asking an example or of a sample WBS dictionary. PMI does not give you a set guidelines of what all should be included in the WBS dictionary and what should not be included in the WBS dictionary. It rather explains in a generic way that WBS dictionary should detail out the work components in the WBS. So I can say it this way that, see, the resource estimation is not yet done at this stage when you are creating the WBS, right? Also, the time estimation, the cost estimation, they are not yet done when you are creating the WBS. What you can do as a best practice in project management, you can document the resource allocation, the duration, the dependencies, etc., within the WBS dictionary at a later stage as and when they come up. At an initial stage, when you just simply create the work breakdown structure, the WBS would not have much information other than the constraints, assumptions, and who is the primary responsible person. But At a later stage, you can keep updating the work breakdown structure with more, the WBS dictionary with more and more information to make it more detailed. Hope that answers your question. No, Janet, unfortunately, I don't have an example to show right now, but it's, as I said, it's a very simple index-like document which explains the work packages with the help of the same numbering system. I have a lengthy question from somebody. Let me see, what is it? 1 second. The controlling level is always 2 levels above the WBS, but while tracking, we have to update all the WBS to get the tracking. How can we track control at a higher level? See, it goes this way. We are not saying that you do not need to come down to the lower level. We are saying that if it's a complex or a large project, you do the controlling at a higher level. Now, let's say one particular component at a higher level changes. Automatically, you will have to change the components at the lower level. But still, your monitoring and controlling becomes a lot easier because you are controlling less number of elements. If I take you back to that example, Sivan, I guess, yeah, Sivan, if I take you back to this example, you can see that the number of elements in the second higher level is less. And as you go lower and lower, the number of elements increases. So my point is, instead of doing the monitoring and controlling at a bottommost layer of the WBS, if you do it at a bit higher level, you have less number of components to monitor and control. Of course, yes, if there is a change in a higher level component, you have to change the lower level components as well. But still, it helps you to do the tracking in a better way because you have less number of elements to track. Another question, the input to WBS is MS Project. No, MS Project is rather a software or a application or a tool that helps you create the project schedule, and it also gives you a pictorial view in form of a Gantt chart, which is very similar to WBS. But don't consider it as a replacement of WBS. Do not consider it as an input to WBS. PMI concentrates on the conceptual part of project management. It doesn't recommend usage of any tool or software as such. So keep Microsoft Project aside. Do not confuse that with WBS. Okay, we have already eaten up the entire